I don't trust the cloud. Okay, here we are. Good to see you.
All right. Good to see you, friend. How are you today?
I'm excellent today.
Fantastic. Me too.
I've been on a good run. And while my life experience tells me that good runs are typically followed by unpleasant downs, it's also told me that you take them when you get them. So,
right. It's a welcome. Amen to that. I hope that's good coffee.
it is extraordinary coffee.
Fantastic.
I've the other experience that I had was now I'm in this situation where I can basically hit anywhere between a 9 and a 10 in coffee. So now what's happening is it like an 8, 9. It's undrinkable now.
Right.
The perfect is the enemy of the good, unfortunately.
That's why we can't always be going up.
Right. You have to have those downs to make sure that you've got actually there's a whole topic there. Yeah. But I wonder if you, by any chance, you happen to have participated in or watched the conversation on the Stoa, this most recent one that I actually failed to make, that I missed.
Oh, no, I did not.
Okay. It was a very interesting experience because I had made a commitment to go in there every Monday. I actually had 2 calls in preparation for that one. People were invited to show up, and I missed it, which is...
I'm actually on the docket to show up next week.
For mine?
Yeah.
Oh, cool. So let's do this then. Let's talk about that topic. Like, this is like canoeing. Yeah. Let's break the surface tension, kind of get some momentum and inertia going, and practice our rhythm. So when we show up, we could just go. But I watched the video of last week's, and honestly, my felt sense was very positive about my lack of being there. Like, I actually began to feel like it would not have been as good had I been there. And I felt like they moved, it's hard to explain, more like they filled in the story. Rather than they moved it forward, it's more like they filled it in. There was a lot of exploration of the edge. So the concept and the topic is the notion of the commons. And to some extent, the notion of what does it mean to endeavor to inventio or reinventio commoning.
Right.
Which I am increasingly of the perspective intuitively, which for me is actually more compelling than from a logical or analytical perspective. Like, there's something like a building in this inside of saying,
you're feeling into this, huh?
Yeah, and feeling it like with solidity. There's a solidity to it. That is the straight and narrow, like the center of the velocity, the center of the energy of what we talked about yesterday. Like, if you're really locked in top to bottom, that is actually commoning. And so so now we're bridging the conversation that you and I and John had, and the conversation about commoning. I'd like to say that the conversation that you and I and John had was a way of looking at commoning from a particular perspective.
Completely.
And now I'd like to kind of take that perspective and I'm going to like whack it like this so it begins to rotate around it.
Okay.
Put it in orbit.
Yep.
So what ends up happening is things like, if I project the domain of considerations around the question of governance. Okay. Right. Obviously,
broadly defined.
Most people will immediately load something kind of derivative of John Locke. Most Westerners. And the characteristics thereafter. If you're American, it'll tend to have a lot of the founding fathers and American jurisprudence. If you're British, you'll have probably some Magna Carta or some other kind of British crap, of which I'm not particularly aware. I have no idea. The Germans probably have a lot of shame around the failures of their own efforts to go into republic and democracy, also the French. But you're loading something along those lines, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And of course, the primary proposition is more or less, almost all of that is an error. Almost all of that is an encrustation. There is something in that is not an error, but almost all of it is in fact an encrustation that needs to be shaken off to recover the source, the essence, the thing, the vital element that is not an error, and then recohere around that something that is much more deeply in alignment with that essence. So
beautiful.
So to shake that off. So the first point would be to sort of, okay, let's shake off those notions.
All right. I'm jiving with that. In fact, I had a conversation that might sync with that with
Bring it.
Mark Edwards. I don't know if you know Mark Edwards, but he's pretty big in the integral community and developed a model of integral methodological pluralism to think about meta theory. Okay.
Did he do something about like the supernatural?
I'm not certain about that.
I read a really good paper by somebody who did something along those lines, and he was actually talking about the idea of the supernatural, and it was actually a really awesome essay.
Cool. So both he and I, Mark Edwards and I, were on the integral stage being interviewed by our various meta theories. He came right before me, and I saw him, and I wanted to reach out to him, and so I befriended him over the last 3 weeks. Over the last 5 years, he's fallen into indigenous wisdom cultures.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Especially Aboriginal Australia indigenous wisdom cultures. And he thinks we have it so effing backwards. What he told me was that his understanding currently is that those cultures stretch back 40 to 60,000 years, which is right at the dawn of the Big Bang of cultural person existence. And he argues that they intentionally did not build civilizations because of the wisdom of the commons.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, let me kind of layer some things on top of that. A point that I would layer into that is a character in the story named Tyson Yonkaporta.
Sure.
He also comes from that lineage, and also with very much that perspective, that city and civilization is a commitment to a path that will lead you astray and always will ultimately abandon you.
Right. Sand talk, right?
Sand talk. Yeah, that's the story. It's funny. After reading it, I actually, for whatever reason, found myself going to the beach almost every day with my daughter. And I ended up just drawing in the sand and contemplating the notions.
Doing some yarns?
well, I would love to find a way to do some yarns and to yarning, which may be not the same. Like there's something about the ing there. Okay, so there's that.
Okay.
What was the other piece? Jubilee. So we have also in our tradition, or at least in the Judeo-Christian tradition, the notion of Jubilee, hard-coded into the book, straight from the mouth of Yahweh. Every X, I think it's 50 years, you got to blow this shit up. So this is a learned from the other side. Hey, we found ourselves kind of stuck, making a commitment to civilization. Our ability to sit in an indigenous frame is sort of not possible or very far away. And we can talk about that too, actually. I think there's some usefulness in putting the story in bigger context. But in any event, we find ourselves stuck in this circumstance. And what we notice is that the story always plays out in this fashion, i.e. we always end up in a circumstance where there's a very small number of extremely powerful elites and everybody else is a slave.
Pareto distribution stuff.
And we're like, the Pareto distribution that actually goes from the 80-20 to the 90-10 to the 99-1, it just kind of keeps subdividing that until it becomes, until eventually it collapses, right? At some point, the strength of the ability to hold that is not adequate to its own instability, and so it collapses. And so our Jewish friends, some long period of time ago, we don't know exactly how long, not as long ago as the Australian Aborigines, said, okay, we got to hard code a Jubilee into this thing. If we don't put that in there, if we don't set it up so that at the deepest level of our civilization code is a mandatory 50-year reboot,
reset,
then it just becomes a complete mess, right? So that was kind of like a patch, it's like a version 2. They're like, oh man, this thing crashes all the time. We're going to put a patch in it, the Jubilee patch.
Right. Which actually a design crash for a reset.
Okay. All right. So here's the thread. So if we'd like, I can go down the indigenous wisdom path, and I can say that's not the right answer. And I can propose, and I believe also prove that that's not it. Also, I can say the critique of indigenous wisdom of civilization is accurate. and that the existence of the Jubilee story, and by the way, we can look at all kinds of variations on the theme, rise and fall and all that kinds of things, that civilization is exactly as described by the indigenous traditions. Therefore, that's not it. Okay, well, that leaves us with a problem, because the model that is our most fundamental inheritance, the indigenous, isn't it? And the model that is the one that we've been exploring outside of that, all of them, as far as I know, isn't it? So we're stuck with, is there a third way? Is there an it? That is it. And so now we are actually prepared for this conversation.
Right. Yeah.
It's an interesting challenge, isn't it? So one of the things that I've been talking about very recently, like I actually just created 2 videos. I've been infected by you, by the way, a little bit of a manic wake up in the middle of the night and just shoot a video. So not sure if I'm partaking of indigenous wisdom or wisdom at all, but at least there's something happening.
So good. My hypomanic spreading. I infected John a little bit too, so we're in good shape.
Oh, actually, a bit of an aside.
Yeah. Just connecting.
This is a theory that I've been working with for quite some time. Is that a hypomanic state is what happens when a flow of connectedness is coming through a circuit that does not have enough amperage to actually carry it. And so that particular, in this case, you, in this story, ends up having a hypermanic state because it's actually short circuiting. What is needed is a larger distributed cognition. Once the distributed cognition becomes equal to the flow that's going through it, everybody drops into a solid state and the flow actually goes up.
Right. And it helps to be a clinical psychologist that can observe in your head. All right, brother.
Well, you're here. Okay.
Don't blow this circuit.
Yes, that's right. Don't blow the circuit. And have a couple of circuit breakers into things that matter. So you don't fry the stuff that really matters.
Distribute it, and then reground. So I'm in a grounded state at the moment.
And something about that actually also seems like it belongs in this conversation. Okay, so in the last video that I did, I was talking about Jubilee design. So let's take this notion of Jubilee and let's maybe think about it as something that hasn't been used as a piece of our toolkit appropriately.
Okay. All right.
And in that context, I said, okay, look, let's actually take, I use the complicated and the complex. And when I say that, we can also talk about that as civilization and indigenous. Now, those are, as far as I'm concerned, effectively the same.
Okay.
Or very, very close. There's a very close relationship. So the indigenous is the complex, relevance realization coming up.
Yep.
And civilization is the complicated proposition coming down.
Just wanted to make sure I'm tracking. I'm completely online now.
Okay. So what happens is that when we instantiate a complicated domain, the complicated is always embedded in the complex. Right? You can have the complex without the complicated. You can't have it the other way around. But much like the prefrontal cortex has this weird characteristic, or the ego mind has a characteristic of forgetting that it's part of an entire wholeness and begins to take itself as the whole, and then becomes increasingly locked into and addicted to its being the whole. The same thing happens at the social level. So when we instantiate a complicated system, when we create a civilization, 3 things happen.
Yep.
One is we begin to become more and more invested in that way, that piece of the whole. We become more dependent upon, and then eventually addicted to that piece of the whole.
Okay.
The second is almost the inverse of that, is that the complex, the indigenous, becomes less and less capable, less and less, it becomes, it's extracted from. Like we actually lose track of and lose competence in. So it's not just that we forget about it, it actually begins to fade and destabilize.
Great. Let me make a comment just for people following. Okay. So the extreme, if I'm hearing you, is let's say we invest in government, which then creates bureaucracy, which then creates an algorithmic code that then is regulating. And ultimately that becomes Big Brother, which would constrain us in a particular shape of that transition into some sort of hell. So then we have a complicated bureaucratic code upon which we are trying to jam our wished for dynamic indigenous lives into, and that would be hell.
Yes. Yeah. And it would be hell. And again, we would actually lose our skillfulness and ultimately even our awareness of the indigenous. we would become, we would begin to imagine or take the complicated as being the whole thing and actually lose track of our capacity to think outside of that box. We would become trapped inside the box.
Exactly.
And then at the highest level of the union of those two, we would in fact become addicted. We would have every choice that we have would actually be doubling down on this and make it harder and harder for us to escape from the box.
Okay.
And you're pointing out kind of where we are now, which is to say, right now we live in an environment where the addiction, right, the obsessive compulsive desire to double down on that which clearly doesn't work, but is the only thing we know how to do, is to try to push more and more of government or governance into the algorithmic. So sesame credits or social credits, AI modulated, individual. Everybody's got a digital identity, fluctuating computational bureaucracy. Right? You take the Chinese Mandarinate rendered into an AI system with fine-grained monitoring control of every human being. Right? That would be the
Then I get credits for being a good husband and a good father.
Right.
But then regulates my behavior as to whether or not I love my kids. How joyous!
How joyous! Now, what we can say is this: that is both. It's like, how do we say this? Like, oh gosh, there's so many ways of saying it, but the basic proposition is that won't work. And it won't work both. It won't actually provide meaningfulness. It'll be the opposite. It'll become more and more of a simulacrum of meaningfulness, which pulls us further and further away from meaningfulness. So we'll kind of like become more and more hollowed out. We'll become the hollow men that Nietzsche talked about. And it will collapse. Right? It actually can't go on forever. It will have a finite state endpoint.
So I think it'd have to eat itself eventually.
In some particular fashion. And we can kind of zoom in on that and talk about it. But the point is, you can look at it from a theoretical level, make that articulate that it's a very straightforward point at the theoretic level, and then you can kind of drop into it and talk about how it plays out.
Perfect.
Okay, so given all of that, the proposition I was making is that you always need to design your governance aware of this relationship between the indigenous and civilization, or the complex and the complicated.
Perfect. Yep.
You always need to design your complicated with a very careful stack structure, where at the deepest level of the stack is a built-in jubilee, which is to say nothing more than the dissolution of the complicated structure and the complete return back to the commons. So it's like playing a game of Monopoly, right? We all come together from a more fundamental basis of being friends. We instantiate a game of Monopoly where we shift our relationality into the characteristics of the domain of the game, and we're playing by the rules of that game. But at the end of the game ends.
Right.
And it all evaporates back to essentially meaninglessness. Who cares about the Monopoly money? It's no longer relevant to reality. And the deeper fundamentalness of friend is we return back to, right? If you could imagine a circumstance where you somehow got trapped into always only playing Monopoly, and that was the only mode of being in relationship with any other person that existed, that's a very good, simple way of understanding what happens when you get lost in the complicated.
Perfect.
So first, always design your games with self-destruct built at the root, at the root.
Right.
Second, thoughtfully design your games so that they are intrinsically, I call this shark skin, I'll explain in a moment what I mean by it, but they're intrinsically designed in the natural dynamics of Homo sapiens, the way that human beings operate and make choices and play out, so that they are very, very difficult to capture. And the game theoretic logic of capturing them begins to fail precisely because the reboot is built in. And so at the point where like capturing the game begins to pop into people's minds, like, oh, maybe this is a game to capture, they'll look at it and say, well, why would I capture this game? Because it's going to be over in the time frame where, but before I could actually really extract a differential selective advantage by capturing it, it'll go away. And when it goes away, I'll be revealed as the asshole in this larger complex, right? So it's kind of like, in some sense, it's like a honeypot for sociopaths. Hey, we found you. You're the asshole. We always wonder where the asshole is. We created a honeypot, and you showed up as the asshole.
Right. We're a little finite game of honey for you, and then we're playing an infinite game on the backside going,
exactly. That's exactly the way to put it. Exactly.
Brilliant.
So you sit in the infinite game and you keep popping out these finite games of honey pots, and you design it so that, it's important. I'm going to propose that we need these finite games,
right?
But they always have to sit in the context of the infinite or the context of the complex. And the best way to design them is that they simultaneously always de-instantiate, and the narcissistic impulse, to use the way that Tyson Yocopurto talks about it, finds itself either with no traction or revealed, like, oh shit, I just got exposed.
Totally.
Then equally, and this is the part I think that has been missed a lot, is equally you must have a modality of livingness in the commons, in commoning, in the complex, that has its own vitality, that has its own direct connection to source, and that has I guess basically two characteristics. One is it can maintain its own integrity, its balance of integrity vis-a-vis the complicated, and it can maintain its capacity to force a reboot if for some reason things went awry inside the complicated.
Okay.
So this is like a much, much deeper way of articulating the notion of checks and balances. In a recent video, I actually thought about how the founders almost intuited this. Okay. And you could say, okay, inside the Constitution, the separation of powers and the way the elections went, like 2 years, 6 years, 4 years, all of that was about trying to design the complicated system so that it was hard to capture.
Right.
Then the Article 5 convention, or the ability to actually have an entirely new constitution written into the Constitution itself, was a little bit like a jubilee provision.
Right.
They fucked up. They should have made it opt out instead of opt in. It should have been like, every 20 years or every fifth presidential election, we have to have like a supermajority vote against the Constitutional Convention, or else it automatically happens.
It dissolves.
Right. And of course, what happens is that logic works really well, because as the complicated system becomes captured,
right,
coordination goes down.
Right.
And so the ability to coordinate enough to cause a constitutional convention actually goes down. But if it was, you had to coordinate enough to stop it, that going down would be like, oh, we need it because we can't even get our shit together enough to agree not to do it. So it's going to happen. So that's one seed. But here's the other side. The other side was the separation of church and state, and things like the Second Amendment, right? That was saying, hey guys, this other thing over here that we're going to call church, which I will propose is pointing towards the indigenous, right? Pointing towards the sacred, pointing towards the complex, pointing towards the commons and commoning. Wired in at the First Amendment, keep these things separate, and by the way, keep this church thing vital. Right? You can't, such a separation is vitality. Right. And then the Second Amendment was, and by the way, worst comes to worst, you need to make sure that the commons, people in general, the people who are not the way that we are formally constructing the institutional framework of the complicated, have the capacity to force a reboot if a reboot is needed.
Okay,
so it's like
a picture.
A poorly, not poorly designed, like actually pretty well designed, but flawed design.
Right.
That contains a lot of the characteristics that I'm proposing, which by the way, I would add now, sorry, this is a Jeremiah ad, but let me add one more piece.
All right.
And then I will stop.
Starting to construct.
Okay, good. So this one I actually just came to my mind as I was riding my bike with my daughter this morning.
Okay.
Something along the lines of commoning, or the commons, is a stack. And by that, what I mean is there are more fundamental levels. And if you don't have the more fundamental levels solid, the higher levels can't hold.
Okay. Yep.
So it's one of these things. It's actually, I think, very similar to the notions of as a therapist. If as an individual human, if I don't have certain things solid, if I extend myself into other further areas, that's going to be unstable. And by the way, it's going to make it even harder for me to get these things solid. So it's like, how do we keep...
You want a robust ground of development.
Right, exactly. So if I look at commoning, one of the things I look at is to say, okay, what's at the bottom of the stack? And how do we orient ourselves that we always are able to be aware of how grounded are we? Where are we in this stack? And if our current location is not solid, how do we elegantly go down until we find a solid location and then begin the developmental process back up? right? And I would use that as maybe a heuristic of monitoring this question of what does it mean to have maintained the integrity and the vitality of the commons.
Right.
Like below this developmental level, if we aren't up to like level 7 in the commons, we've lost it, and that's bad news. Emergency, return all forces to this, get us back up to above level 7. Yeah, get grounded. Yeah, I think that's what I got.
Beautiful. Okay. All right. So this is of course where my mind was going, is sort of now we're creating this space of the commons around these finite games, this infinite game grounded space, right? Then was going to then place us in our humanity somehow in this indigenous space of being, right? So then I was thinking, yeah, okay, what does this actually look like? So you then immediately started to create the vision for that, this, being a systematist, and really like, hey, okay, yes, there's a developmental ground of structure. So that started to fill that in. I wonder kind of where you are on commoning and the commons, if there are other pieces. And I'm also curious maybe to go to the conversation that I was not a part of. I sort of meant to, but life interfered. The Stoa conversation and what they were dialoguing about as this emergent idea of the commons and commonings takes hold.
Well, I think I may have inadvertently recapitulated a decent amount of at least what came to me as a result of observing their conversation. Many of these connections. For example, the notion of the sacred and the commons. Here's a piece that that I'm pretty sure was not said explicitly in that conversation, but kind of lit up for me.
Okay.
Forrest used a term that I don't believe it's his term, but he uses it, which is the notion of truly owned, which is a different way of saying inalienable, which is a different way of saying root or most fundamental aspect of the commons.
Gotcha.
And this is important because if I'm looking for something that cannot be extracted into the complicated, strictly cannot be, like at the geometric level, then I'm looking for the truly owned, the absolutely inalienable.
Okay.
Now, it may not be much, right? I mean, this may be a very, very, small set, but that set is the set from which, the only set that you can be absolutely certain is a set from which you can always reboot a commons. Make sense?
Okay.
Scenario, if I just blow away literally everything else and settle only on this set of the truly inalienable, then I can be absolutely certain I'm working with a clean toolkit.
All right.
Then, and by the way, since we know that the indigenous is a autochthonous emergent process on top of human persons, we should actually reboot something in the mode of the indigenous from that location.
Gotcha.
And as we know, civilization sits on top of the indigenous. We will then arrive back at the point from which we departed. So it may be like that's the deep code. So what kinds of things are truly owned? And what's funny is Forrest articulated it, one, choice. Not a particular choice, but choice in and of itself is
choice in and of itself.
And this made me think of Viktor Frankl. Right? Viktor Frankl, I think, was saying more or less exactly the same thing. It's like, hey, motherfucker, you could put my ass in a seriously bad situation. And as it turns out, here's a set of stuff that you can't take away.
Will to meaning.
No matter what you do, you cannot take this away. And if I sit on that, and I sit in that very specific location, I'm in fact truly free, no matter what you do. And this is the place from which humaning and human persons has the capacity to recohere. I can actually be a person in the concentration camp. The constraints around me are high. I'm still a person.
Okay. That jives completely with the unified theory, by the way. So that's good.
Yeah. Okay. So that was one of the big things. And then you say, okay, well, what is the sacred? Well, the sacred is simultaneously that, right? That set of things that are truly owned are the sacred. And the process by which we operate from that location in relationship with the real. So we can call it sacreding if we want, but the point is it's both a noun and a verb, and it refers to that. And the sphere of the sacred then can grow as we maintain integrity or continuity of that connection. So that which is inside the sphere of the sacred is that which has continuity back down to that which is truly owned through a discontinuous or a continuous process of sacreding.
Beautiful.
And so then commoning is almost in some sense another way of saying sacreding. And it's very careful not to lose that, right? It's and indigenous, right? So if you map, if I take like the word commoning and I think about it from the point of view of like the medieval commoners, but then I say, now let me take indigenous, right? And from the point of view of the indigenous, we actually have a very clean notion of the commons as literally being all of nature, right? And a relationship with that it has its own, like there's a carefulness and responsibility, a sacred relationship with the whole of nature is commoning, right? It's the appropriate. Now, by the time we get to sort of medieval Europe, when we're talking about commoners, we're like, 15,000 years away from that, right? So it makes sense that it's a weird version of that notion, and yet still wasn't dead, right? There still was a vitality to it and a remembering of the necessity of a return to the sacred and the recognition of the, what do they call it? Like, God's green earth, the notion of that at the end of the day, I don't own anything. God owns everything. And I steward it on behalf of God, right? That was a medieval sensibility. And that's not a bad way of doing it, right? In the past, one of the ways that we tried to ground our jubilee at the bottom of the code was to say that all civilization, all complicatedness had as its ground God. God is the superior to or more fundamental than any given human institution, and God said this, right? So this is like the base code. You can't violate it. Now, of course, we've I think discovered that clever monkeys can find a way to game their way around that particular approach. But I think that we can actually be more thoughtful about how we go about doing things and make sure that the clever monkeys are stewarded into their highest consistently.
Brilliant. Sounds like the seeds of a religion that's not a religion.
Does very much sounds like the seeds of a religion that's not a religion, and therefore is the most religious religion you could imagine.
Down to the base.
All right, so where do we go from here? What's the part of the story that is ours to tell? Yeah, notice that you cover a lot of interesting ground. You play in the distinct individual embedded in the wholeness of their specificity, the therapeutic mode, and you play in the whole story. Like they're literally trying to find ways to integrate theories of everything at the physics level with a unified theory of knowledge at the subjective level. So it's a pretty big sphere.
Yeah, I noticed.
So where's the location? This is neat, actually. This is kind of interesting to figure out. Like, okay, what's the thing that is singularly the highest harmony between my beingness and your beingness in this story?
Okay. Well, for me, what I just went to, the ground of value.
Okay.
Ground of value, whereby at least as we play off the commoning, right, and the building, and you with your daughter, okay, and what is the space, the infinite game space that allows for the commoning of the sacred that can hold all of our complicated civilization and allow us the kind of continuity towards our human potential over time. And so then what truly do we want to own? And choice into love and value feels to me like, okay, we want to be like, if we choose and lean into loving value, that what I did on my journey, when I then said, well, what are what we're at here is what are the ultimate values of being that supersedes science because I need to align my essence of being with them in terms of my subjective value.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah. That's pretty intense. So what I was just seeing, how do I say this right? Oh, gosh, there's so many different ways to look at it now. Oh, okay. So we have lost track of value. We've lost track of meaningfulness. And I'll give you an example.
To circle back to Victor, who was groping for it pretty well. But yep.
Eldering in the West, and particularly in America, is horrifying. I mean, just think about this very, very simple things. Like as an individual, reflect on what fraction of your time and attention is spent in beautiful relationship with the people who you care about the most. And what time and attention is spent in a complete mess, and what time and attention is spent sort of in superficial relationship. Right?
It's not accidental that the suicide rate is skyrocketing.
Yeah, that's exactly the point. Yeah. You know, the way, the felt sense of like those last decade of years, and what is like when meaningfulness, when humanness kind of comes up front and center. You know, when you're 50s and 60s, you can continue to take your pain pills, watch TV, you can go on, you know, vacations to fancy places, you can kind of dress up fancy and go out and have cocktail parties. The simulacrum can meet your needs. But in that last period of time, it's like the real raw humanness, you can't get away from it. And when you're sitting in the simulacrum, you're suddenly like the horror show of the simulacrum is just unavoidable. Okay, hold that. Then what I was seeing as I was seeing a global scale or reorientation to care, a global scale reorientation towards the direction of meaningfulness, which of course means small scale, right? Of course, it means starting at the level of, frankly, the indigenous in scale, like Dunbar and family and, you know, kinship. And when I use kinship on Facebook, many people took it to mean genetic relations. And okay, yeah, but the word ship means specifically that which is not the same as, right? So kin is kin, kinship is the ability to have a felt sense of relationality with other people than your kin, who has the same level of quality as you would imagine a good kin relationship would provide.
That actually reminds me, something I haven't been salient, but that really catches it. You know, ever since I jumped out of the academy and been catching these, you know, the futurist wave communities, you know what I found myself saying? Hey, brother. Right? Yeah. I never said that I would almost never say that to my,
interesting. You know, to the academy.
To the academy, you know, it was like friend, but brother. There's a philosophia that, I mean, you know, there's that definite brothership, philia brothership. Too bad John's not here. He could fill in all my Greek words for me.
Really well. I love how well he does that. It's one of my favorite things.
That puts me to shame. But no, it's that fellowship, the brotherhood, fellowship. You know,
kinship,
purpose,
fellowship,
and mattering, and a sense of the kairotic moment, and a sense that things, you know, that we are together in something. I also catch in the background. Is your daughter in the background there?
You probably heard her. Yeah, she's around toddling something.
Okay, well, it actually touched me emotionally. Okay, I want to stop with that for a second, because us talking about trying to do this as a father of three, it matters.
Oh, it matters, man. I tell you what. Yeah, I've got this, what is it? Thorn? No, it's not even a thorn. It's like a stake.
So in terms of, I have 3 kids. All right. There are times I get scared for them. Just, you know, what's the world going to look like? Okay. So to me, and I've talked to a lot of people in clinical, and in the clinic room, this is when you're like, oh my God, what the fuck matters? And what really, this we have to tap into, as far as I'm concerned. This fright, what's in my heart right now, that's the core of my primate being saying, Jesus, it matters. I care. Right? There's an energy there that somehow we need to release and pour into.
Okay, you ready? So this is the other piece I want to layer on. Whew, okay. So it will be hard. It will be hard for this to happen at global scale. And the civilization that we have built up has put us way over our skis. We in fact cannot. We cannot, in a classic indigenous mode, provide for the well-being of 10 billion souls. We are way out over that, and it will be hard for us to return, right, to something, anything, to shift from this place to another place. Will be hard, and I'm going to say it very cleanly: people will die. Right? In fact, possibly many people, but certainly some. The hope is, and this is like, I wanted to bring up that notion of eldering. Okay. The hope is that it will be a meaningful death. The hope is that there will be a way for people to feel a connectedness to each other and to life and to something that is bigger than themselves, such that whether they live or die becomes less important than this journey that they are on. All right, that's the thing, and that's, I think, entirely available. And think about this as like, oh my gosh, guys, here's the gift. The gift is no longer any fear of death at all. Right? A gift of such a deep level of connectedness to meaningfulness that you can enrich the souls of those around you by the quality with which you pass away. For example. Right? That's what's at the center of these kinds of recoherences, these different sort of indigenous rediscoveries.
Be a good ancestor. I like that phrase.
Yeah.
Be a good ancestor.
And I mean, when someone who is close to you passes away, unless you are truly, truly down in hell, you are reconnected with reality, with meaningfulness. Like, right. It may not last long, but you find it difficult and painful to connect yourself back into the matrix. And that's the gift of death, right? To die a beautiful death is to use the fact of the quality of your life to touch as many people as deeply as possible, to reawaken in them the felt sense and the commitment and the capacity to do what is necessary to truly live.
Right? It's nature's jubilee.
It's nature's jubilee. Fuck. That is exactly right, dude. It's nature's jubilee. And here's the thing, right? What's the phrase? There is something on the other side, and you can't take it with you. But you will be judged. If it turns out you're the asshole, it's not going to be pretty.
Right. You're trying to control the finite game. We will reveal your
Oh, man, that's right. We're playing an infinite game here, everybody. Check it out. We instantiated this entire infinite game. Yeah, Elon Musk, it is a simulation. It's been a simulation the whole time. It's a honeypot. The rules to play nice have been written down. Play nice. By the way, the reboot is coming. It's coming soon. It's coming soon for everybody. And it's also coming soon for you as an individual, right? I guarantee you that the manic desire to achieve practical immortality is not going to happen. Certainly not in your lifetime. And I'm not here talking just to Elon Musk here. I'm not going to everybody who happens to choose to watch this. Yeah, it's really interesting to think about that. But that's where it's going to go, right? It's going to go to a place of like, and so what I'm trying to hit on is this. I'm trying to hit on, let's just talk, I'm going to shift from where we are to a different mode.
Actually, I would wanted to ask a meaning. Eldering. Can you, wasn't sure that I fully caught the meaning.
What I was trying to say was ELDERING. So the experience, the first person experience of becoming and being an elder.
Being an elder. Gotcha.
And
perfect. Okay.
You know, the horror show of that now.
I gotcha. Right.
And by the way, we can kind of run off on that and how we got there and why and why
I just wanted to make sure that I was locked in on the
that notion. All right, so here's the shift I'd like to play out, and I can kind of almost feel it popping up in certain kinds of minds. Okay. And let's just use climate change as the frame. Okay. Now, I would say that again, there's three basic responses to climate change, and two of which are naive. So there's naive, let's call it generous or naive caring, which is characterized as almost the whole of those who believe that climate change is real. Right? Naive caring says, okay, climate change is real. The consequences of climate change have, affect everybody on the planet, and by the way, affect the sort of the third world more than the first world, and yet the first world has produced the effect much more powerfully, infinitely more powerfully than the other. So this is like clearly unjust. It's about as unjust as you can imagine, and billions of people, right, could die on the basis of this thing, and therefore we're going to endeavor to use a senescent, inadequate, highly corrupted, complicated infrastructure to try to govern our way past that. That's the naive part. That's the naive part. And this happens all the time, right? There's a naive, we don't have enough homes for people, so we're going to build the projects. Fill in the blank. It's the,
right, of course.
It's the yearning to do something well with a naive belief in highly obviously inadequate tools, and then kind of like waving your hands in the middle of it and trying to feel better about the thing. Oh, I did something good.
Right. The conservative critique of naive progressivism has some wisdom.
It is correct. This is the thing. Both sides are fucking right. This is the problem. It's not like one or the other. You're both wrong. You're both right. It's got to be a third. Okay. So let's switch to number two, right? The naive conservative approach. It's naive in a very different sense. Maybe it's a different version, but it's naive in a very particular sense. Like, I don't want to give up my truck. Fuck you. The Chinese aren't giving up their ability to dump carbon into the atmosphere, and giant tankers shipping plastic crap that takes away my job are contributing a lot more carbon than my fucking truck. So get off my ass.
Right.
At the end of the day, they're feeling the reality of the approach that's being taken. At the end of the day, really, really is an elitist cross subsidy. We're gonna.
And they have a big bumper sticker on their truck that says "Fuck the Commons."
Well, not really. It's more like what's the real essence of it? The essence is something like, you don't get to fuck me using the notion of the commons as the argument. That's what it really is. No,
that's absolutely the conscious argument. Yes.
And then
I guess I should have said that should go in the shadow of that bumper sticker.
Right. Yeah, that's what, if you've got kind of like, progressive goggles on, that's what you see. Take the goggles off, you're like, oh, okay. And that's real, right? It's like, hey, look, I'm taking care of my family. I got to take care of my commons locally, and all I see is you fucking me. And I don't want that guy over there in India to suffer. But this fucking me is not going to help that guy. It's not going to work. And I'm pretty sure you're full of shit, right? I'm pretty sure you're lying anyway.
I'm pretty sure you're corrupt, part of a complicated, corrupt system. So fuck you.
I noticed that you flew a private jet to Davos to talk about this shit. Right? I just noticed. I was paying attention.
Right. For the record.
You didn't row a canoe.
Right.
All right. So that's like that one. But here's the problem. Whether or not you believe that climate change is real, okay, now we can kind of delete that. The proposition that complicated systems generate externalities into the complex, into nature, into human nature, right, and into their own working, their own machinery, and therefore, one, will collapse, and two, if allowed to hypertrophy beyond certain critical thresholds, will break the homeostatic capacity of the complicated systems they're operating on, complex systems they're operating on.
Right.
A set of words that is itself too complicated to be received by most minds, nonetheless, is a precise articulation of a phenomenon, which we can generate it back down. Shit's fucked up, right? Things are definitely going to break in a bad way. And here's the problem. When the flood comes, your family is not going to fare any better, right? This thing is not going to work out. You cannot put on blinders. The problem has to be solved. You have to be willing to solve that problem. All right, so then we end up with the third, right? So my point is, hey, there's going to be something like a necessity to give up a lot of the stuff that we've become used to in the West. Right? I'm going to give you the really, really good news. It's shit. You never needed it. Frankly, you never wanted it. Right? It distracts you from life. It distracts you from meaningfulness. Return back to meaningful life, and you will remember that it was shit in the first place. Right? That's the thing. Right? That's the notion. And you will truly own that which is truly owned and work your way up from there. So we want to say, let us resacralize the sacred. Let's honor the sacred. Let's return our capacity to be in sacred relationship with life and with the world, and not engage in the profane. Like, I'm going to flush the profane down the toilet. Now, it turns out, if I really seriously actually want to flush the profane down the toilet, I will end up giving up almost all of what we have generated at an institutional infrastructural level, right? Okay, that's what I'm trying to say to folks on that side of the equation.
Gotcha.
That's the key message. Now, here's the thing. Again, it ain't going to be easy. We cannot instantaneously actually take care of everybody. And in some sense, that's not our job, right? It's not our job to try to create a global institution that top down relieves everyone of the requirements of actually living lives, right? That removes meaningfulness. It's corrosive to meaningfulness.
Absolutely.
We want meaningfulness to be the thing that'll enable. So the indigenous from the bottom, then carefully as hell, start thinking about how we instantiate complicated systems that have built-in self-destructs at their instantiative root, right? Down to the bottom, and are designed carefully so that the act of gaming them is evidence of sociopathic tendencies, and maintain the integrity of the commons as a sacred trust, right? Something along those lines. It's a long arc, and obviously what can I say? I don't know of anybody who can do what I just said. I certainly cannot give you IKEA instructions for assembling this particular, hutch, but certainly it's in the frame of directionality.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, it's delineating to me the directionality, and this is the religion that's not a religion core essence, is what is sacred, what is valuable, what's the true commitment, to meaning that we are making.
Yeah. I mean, and sorry, this just keeps coming up, but something like unemployment sucks, right? But imagine if you thought about it the other way around. Imagine that instead of losing your job, you said, take this job and shove it. I'm going to spend time with my family.
Yep.
I'm going to create relationships with like my cousins, right? Which is a weird thing, because from my point, this is more personal, but the point is that this is, I think, universal. Or my neighbors, fill in the blank. Like almost nobody these days has any relationship with their neighbors, which is a relatively recent phenomenon.
Totally.
And also just straightforward old-fashioned kin relationships are almost completely evaporated.
Oh my God.
So imagine if you're able to flip it around and say, hey, here's the deal. Take this job and shove it. Right? It's a bullshit job anyway. If it's not a bullshit job, by the way, don't quit. We need you. If what you're doing is actually important, keep doing it. We'll figure out how to take care of you and your loved ones. Like if you're doing something important, then you're in service of the commons in a deep way. And we need to make sure that you and your loved ones are deeply taken care of. But if you're working a bullshit job, we need to find a way to help you quit your bullshit job, right? And return to discovering a meaningful life and a wholesome life from root. Right?
Totally.
And by the way, at a global scale, right? This is certainly super non-trivial. But if I just put it in the context of the U.S., one of the things I was thinking about, it's funny, this came to me back in the financial crisis, like 2008.
Oh, okay.
I was like, oh man, this thing could like really the wheels could come off this thing. Like, people forget how close it came to just being a complete meltdown, to,
domino,
much deeper than a Great Depression. And then I was like, well, okay, let me just let's say that the economy crashes and we fall back to a 1967 quality of life. I was like, actually, if I recall the stories of my elders, 1967 was a pretty fucking good year. Okay, it's not that bad. And the point is that we have so much stuff.
Oh my God.
We have so much stuff.
I distinctly remember a moment with Sue Savage Rumbaugh. Sue Savage Rumbaugh, she's the she was famous at the Great Ape Trust, worked with the bonobos and language.
Ah, okay.
And I had a conference, and then I worked with her for a year, and we were putting together a proposal where I was going to go see if apes could justify their actions, which would have been cool. But then she got into a big fight with the Great Ape Trust, and that all spun out of control.
Oh.
But here, that's an aside. Here was the moment. So she was getting funded from the Great Ape Trust by a super wealthy guy, and they flew me out and a few other people out to have a conference, and loaned his convertible Jag. Okay, so we went to the conference. We're out on this patio, right? We sit in this Jag, and I'm not, I'm upper middle class. I'm not upper. Okay, that's where my history. I sit in this thing. I'm like, oh my God. Okay, and we look at each other, and we're like, oh my God, this is what's wrong with humanity. Okay? Right? Because as soon as you taste it, right? And then the issue is, I want my Jag this way, and I want my house this way, and I want this and this and this, and I want that hedonic treadmill of consumption and massive amounts of bubble of elegance and consumer materialism. I mean, that was yeah, that was like, so, and now I'll share back to where I am right now. I told you last conversation we had, I had a peak moment of in gross consciousness, walking my dog Benji just around the neighborhood. Okay. Right. And so for me, that the cultivation of that, right? You cultivate that, there's a commons to be had there.
Yes. Yeah. So I'm going to try to say back to what I think you heard, or I think you said. It's something like simplicity, or the simple life, contains within it, if lived rightly, the capacity to have experiences that are, well, in fact, sacred. We could just go with it at the top, right? The sacred is very easily available. It is present. This kind of feels like a weird thing, but this is how I relate with my daughter. When I go spend time with my daughter, I make every effort to drop into a fully sacred space. Right? Those moments are sacred. Right. And if I notice that if I'm thinking about something else, if I'm not fully present, I go through whatever process I've developed in myself to be able to come back down into a fully sacred space. And here's the thing. There it is, right? That's real simple.
That's right.
Walking down the sidewalk with my daughter, looking at a flower.
Totally. And look at the directionality of, oh my God, I need a convertible Jag and make $50 million a year, right? Think about that directionality.
Yeah.
About what is sacred, right? And what do you remember as you're dying? You remember your convertible Jag, or you remember the cherished time with your dog?
Okay, you ready? All right. So this is what comes up. Shoot, how do I do this? Okay, I'm going to go there. I'm going to go to the new thing. The challenge. I think many people, frankly, are aware of this. This is not a mysterious proposition. The challenge is that the guy who made the choices to make $50 million a year ends up with the ability to fuck with your simple life. Therein lies the challenge, right? If I've made a commitment to the sacred, and I am living a simple, peaceful, wholesome life, right? I take care of myself. I take care of my kin, those people with whom I have established relationships of kinship. I take care of my community, right? I am peaceful and kind and wise and generous, filling all the virtues. I am a loser, capital L, in the complicated game that we are currently addicted to, right? And so the game theoretic construct, if you're a teenager, right, you're looking out like, oh, I could be like that guy and be a fucking loser and have everything I own taken away by this institutional, the bulldozer, bulldozering over the beautifully made temple. It's funny, it just came to my mind. There was a place, the Hill of Tara in Ireland. And this is like a sacred, very long standing, like thousands of year old sacred space. And I actually remember being in communication with a man in Ireland who was trying to put together a sort of a protest to prevent it from having like a highway plowed right through the middle of it.
Right.
And he failed. Right. So if I'm a kid watching that, the moral lesson is heartbreak and failure is on this side of the equation, and a slightly faster commute to Dublin's on this side of the equation. Right. And so it actually takes a unusual character to choose the path of being a loser than to choose the path of being what do we want to turn this over here is like this. It's like a very particular term that describes somebody who exchanges their long-term meaningfulness, right, for short-term simulation of winning. You know, something like a vampire or a shade or or it's Cypher. It's actually perfectly Cypher. We have that metaphor. Cypher from the Matrix.
Yep.
You know, you can either choose to be, out of the Matrix, eating, simulated gruel and having a wacky haircut, or you can choose to be inside the Matrix having delicious simulated steak. And it takes an unusual person to actually choose to really truly exit the Matrix. Now, of course, the proposition is if we design this thing right, the thing on the other side is actually not always going to be heartbreak and lose. Right? That's my point. Like we have to actually.
That's right.
That actually needs to become strong enough that it maintains its integrity and can actually impose its dispositions on the larger structure.
Totally. Which is exactly, remember when I called you when we talked on you were driving your RV and I called you, remember? And I said, I want to tweak something because there's a crucial distinction in the unified theory between social influence and relational value.
Yeah. Okay. Keep going.
Right? Okay. So social on the argument is that we're primates. So we're super tracking our place in the social matrix. Okay. And it's called the influence matrix because we're tracking both the process of influence and we're tracking social influence as a resource, which is, hey, how much can I move you so that your actions invest back in me? That's the basic and that's the instrumental frame for survival, reproductive success. And that at the basic mechanics of natural selection, that's key. Okay. And I called it the influence matrix because high influence is a hell of a lot better than low influence across survival and reproductive success. That's straightforward. All right. But then as I was doing clinical work, I noticed something. All right. And that was a lot of people who had high influence were empty. Okay. And they felt like imposters. They faked it. Okay. And the two issues that were happening were a lot of people had low influence and were not valued. Okay. Well, you're shit if you're hating that. Right. But some people have high influence, but they feel valued for their persona, but not for who they are. Okay. There are other people that have high influence that know they aren't valued, but they have power. Okay. And all of those individuals don't feel grounded in the essential valuing of being, which is actually being known and valued by important others and having reasonable influence. That's the ground of being. That feeds the soul. Okay. And so what we did with capital labor relations was we front-ended, like I did theoretically, we front-ended instrumental influence and then capital contingents so that you have power and influence, and that's the fusion. And if you can build a fucking highway, you build your highway, and that sacred thing that somebody else cared about, well. But we have to redirect the value toward relational value and being known in values, creating the commons of shared value, which then gets back into agape and love and the various kinds of ways of connecting to people, our kin, and valuing each other in authentic, true ways.
Yeah. So maybe to close this, I feel like we're kind of reaching the end of at least my capacity to continue to participate rightly. The question of how, right? It's a good question. It's, by the way, not a question that I ignore. Like I spent 15 years working on that question, but quite often, if you want to avoid the progressive naivete problem, right? If you want to avoid pretending to have a how, to feel better about yourself, oftentimes you have to actually say, oh shit, that's not going to work, and actually go back down. It's okay, what is this? Just keep going, basics, until you have a solid foundation where your how is in fact effective. How do you make effective choices, right? That's the question. Not just random bullshit choices that maybe make you look good or feel good. All right, so how? The solidarity movement in Poland. Right? Remember that time? There was that really interesting time where Eastern Europe, so East Germany, Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, under the thumb of ruthless totalitarianism. Let's not be, it was ruthless totalitarianism. There's no question, right? That was the Stasi was a real thing. Right? That was rough.
Yeah.
But they won. A velvet revolution, in fact, right? Somehow, magically, the Berlin Wall just stopped being relevant, right? Somehow, without mass slaughter, right? Without a violent rending where lots of people had to get killed, the wall just kind of came down, man. And, kids with backpacks, and I was one of them, like right after Czechoslovakia became open, like within 6 months. I just happened to be in the area, so I rode a train to Czechoslovakia.
Really?
Yeah. Wow. So actually remember going through a portion of Germany where maybe it was like Leipzig or something like that.
Okay.
Where the wall had literally just come down, or the ability to cross the border had just become available, and it was a very short distance, like they were right next to the border. Point being, solidarity.
Yes.
Right. There's something about the ability of people in right relationship in the commons, if they can get their shit together and just connect and learn how to have agreements as mature humans, and then make commitments to do hard things in the context of those agreements as mature humans, that has what apparently is a tremendous power, right? Just case in point, apparently ruthless totalitarianism could not even hold a candle to solidarity. Now, to be fair, I don't know if that would have worked in 1957.
Sure.
Right? Time had passed. The infrastructure of ruthless totalitarianism had become senescent. But guess what? The infrastructure that we're sitting in right now, my diagnosis is really, really, really senescent. We're not dealing with a highly competent, ruthless totalitarianism right now. We're dealing with a barely holding itself together, dysfunctional mid-century bureaucracy, which is rife with corruption and with corruption of both flavors. So maybe it's as simple as solidarity. Right? It's as simple as human beings learning how to have strong, like the kinds of bonds that can hold weight, relationships with other human beings, and have agreements as mature individuals and resolve those agreements like grown-ups resolve agreements, and then begin to make choices together. Ideally, how about good choices, like smart strategic choices that actually shift things, right? So for example, much, much, much less energy spent protesting in the streets. Why? Because the only thing that protesting in the streets might ever have done is to convince your government to do something different. Right? That's all it could do. All it can do is cause the people, the institutional leaders in charge, to change what they're doing. My message to you is they can't help. Even if they weren't hopelessly corrupt and incompetent, even if they were awesome and in good faith, they can't help. That institutional structure itself isn't going to solve, it can't possibly solve the problem, right? It is as much the problem as anything else. So less time and energy spent doing something that can't possibly work, more time and energy spent doing something that could.
Beautiful.
Maybe that's the first proposal of how, maybe a little tiny bit of how.
I love it. In fact, my friend, he's the leader on it, but he's a part of the TOK executive committee and spearheaded this prototype called Creating Common Ground. And it's get out of propositions and positions, get into values, needs, and work together to solve them.
Yeah.
In the embodied sense. So it's he's very rich in the interpersonal construction of justifications and fields, like it's coming together and creating common ground.
Yeah. All right. We could go on for a long time. This is good.
Yeah.
Nice.
Covered a lot of ground.
My understanding is that next time, like next week, it's going to be you, me, and Johnny V.
Yeah. And actually, I guess even before that, I will be showing up at the I'll pop up at the Stoa somehow. Peter just invited me, so I will show.
Nice.
So say hey.
So this is part of the transcendent conversation. This is key. People need to get this. The kind of conversation that's showing up in the Stoa cannot be held in a kind of a linear container. Right? You have to actually be operating strictly non-linearly to be able to actually participate in that conversation. So this is like one of those transmedia events where things are happening in Captain America and in Iron Man. And if you just watch Iron Man, you're kind of like, you don't know what happened in Captain America. Like you have to this is a transmedia event, guys. This is really happening all over the place. This conversation was part of that conversation. The one I wasn't in, I was in by virtue of being in this. There's something going on here, right? We're discovering how to do it while endeavoring to do it while talking about
it. We're commoning together.
All right, man.
Beautiful. Peace.
How do I stop the recording?